Hi, this is Rupert G from the Hello Deli, and you're currently watching the Letterman podcast.
La, 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 la. Welcome once again to the Letterman podcast. We have been on a roll lately, and as stoked as I was from the very first awkward couple of episodes that we put out, I am even more excited about this show and the conversations that are happening. I mean, bucket list items are getting just checked off left and right and center and all of that crap. It's been a lot of fun. Still reeling from the anniversary week, the episodes with Morty. Just fantastic time hosting the Letterman podcast. Thank you very much. I'm never not going to say I'm grateful for this thing. I'm so grateful for it. I'm grateful for everybody who's jumping on. And we've had a lot of, during the anniversary week, during the May 20th week, also Morty's birthday, we've had a lot of responses. I've had a lot of people reaching out to me. And I just want to say thank you to everybody. Come on in, join the Facebook group. Let's do a lot of this stuff publicly where we can all bounce off each other and learn from each other. But at the same time, the people who do reach out to me personally, thank you so much for that. It's delightful. Okay, a few weeks ago, we had Carter Bays. Carter Bays was part of a writing team for The Late Show with David Letterman. And today we've got his partner, Craig Thomas. These two guys are fantastic. They both have this... I really enjoyed interviewing them as close, or having a conversation with them, I should say. It's not so much an interview show. It's a conversation show where we go back and forth. And I like it better that way, because then it gives me an excuse to, to blather on like a blowhard. In an interview, it's not like that. I love conversing with people, and I love conversing with people about David Letterman. Now, it's been fun talking to these two so close to each other, because they were writing partners in everything that they did from college all the way to the current day, with, obviously the co-creators and showrunners of How I Met Your Mother. Phenomenal run. I love the contrast, talking to Carter and then today talking to Craig. The two points of view that come into this, I can certainly see why they complement each other, but very different episodes, and just exciting stuff. Craig and I talk about a lot of things. Now, I've been thinking about what my top 10 favorite moments are in Letterman history. I've been thinking about that for a variety of reasons. There's a couple of us behind the scenes who are coming up with our top 10 lists, and maybe one day we can share those with everybody. But in my top 10 list, definitely, there's a moment that it's in the top 3 for sure. And depending on the day, it's my number 1 moment, my very, very, very favorite moment in all of The Late Show with David Letterman. The body of work is what we call it, but the entire run on both shows, there's this one moment with Alan Kalter, and it is mind-blowing to me. I've talked, for those of you who have been early adopters of the show, you've heard me talk about it before. I've actually asked writers about this moment before, and they've kind of pointed me in the direction of other writers. I found the guy. Craig and Carter did this, and Craig and I talk about this moment a lot. So Craig and Carter also just had recently their top moments, staff favorite moments on the official Letterman channel. Walter put up a wonderful compilation between both of them of these moments, and they played this segment, I believe, in its entirety, with White Rabbit and everything. I'm not sure if they had to get clearances on that or what, but holy cow, it is one of my very favorite moments. It's Alan Kalter's descent into madness. This guy helped write it and produce it. And Craig has this fantastic conversation, and we talk about this moment, but we use it in a much broader way to talk about how writers, particularly writers of things like the Mailbag, where there would be segments, and how their job was to kind of sort of be miniature showrunners. They would take these concepts and from the beginning and literally shepherd them all the way to when they were ready to air. And we talk about a lot of stuff. We talk about How I Met Your Mother a little bit, and where the inspiration for the bar came from in How I Met Your Mother. And we have a beautiful bonding moment over Cheers. And then he tells me about the bar that the writers used to go to, and how they based that bar for the show, How I Met Your Mother, and just anyway, all sorts of great stuff. I'm going to stop right now. Craig Thomas is fantastic. We have to talk about the writers because at the time of this recording, the writers are on strike right now, and so we talk a little bit about that as well, and many other things. I'm very excited about this. I can't wait to maybe have them both on a future episode, both Craig and Carter. But for now, the Letterman Podcast is proud to present Craig Thomas.
Of all of that material till now. You were cherry picking and searching for it, needle in a haystack, and there was a lot of it, but it wasn't organized and curated. So I think it's great that they're doing that in the same way it's good that you're doing this.
I swear to God, Craig, that's where part of my childlike delusion comes from, is that is that it started around the same time. I started around that time. And it would be so cool. And again, when I started it, it was 100% authentic in the sense of I don't want negative stuff. I want it to be positive. I want it to be a celebration of the greatest body of broadcasting work in history. So it was automatically kind of on brand with what Pants is doing. Well, and let's talk about this a little bit, because Walter and I do go back and forth sometimes, and there's nothing ever really coordinated, other than I've had a couple moments that I've wanted to see on the channel where I've kind of messaged him and said, hey, would you mind throwing this up? Because I just love it. And he's like, yeah, we'll put it up as a Fan Friday or whatever, which is great. But I love some of the unintentional synergies that have happened. And there's one that's involving you and Carter, because we had Carter on, I should say, before your staff favorite moments went up. I'm sure Walter had shot it with you guys or whatever, but I didn't know what was going to be in it. I had Carter on, and then in between having Carter and you on, your staff favorite moments went up. It just went up a little while ago here. I can't wait to dive in to this with you, because one of my very favorite moments of all time, I've actually I think I talked to Grossman and Ellerberg or Weiner about this one moment with Alan Kalter, which is if you had to tie me down and ask me about my favorite late show moment that didn't involve Dave, it would probably be this one moment. And it turns out you guys wrote it. So I got to ask you this first and foremost. I mean, How I Met Your Mother is such a, it's a huge part of sitcom history, certainly of modern CBS sitcom history, that kind of thing. You get questions about that all the time. You're famous for that. I want to know if it's, I want to get into if this is something where you feel like you're a little typecast because of it. Like, does it overshadow everything? Now that your favorite moments segment has come out, have people come out of the woodwork and been asking you about Letterman stuff again?
Yeah, I mean, so many thoughts all at once. One is
I know, I'm sorry, brother. I do that.
No, it's great. It's great. And I'll send you the blurb. I just said something nice about your podcast off the air. And now that we're on the air, by air, I mean you're recording a podcast.
Yeah.
I'll say I think it's great that you're doing this. I think it's great to have like a curated, thoughtful conversation about this, like almost 3 decades of material. I grew up watching the old show, watching the late night show in the 80s into the early 90s. That was like pivotal to me, formative. It hit me at exactly the right age. It's like finding your favorite band, it was as defining as that. And it changed my life. It changed my life watching that show, staying up till 12:30 and being tired in high school the next morning, but it being completely worth it because that kind of was more valuable to me in some ways than high school was. So that's that. Thank you for doing what you're doing and keeping these memories alive. But yeah, in terms of my memories, my connection, How I Met Your Mother and Late Show, the biggest connection that comes to mind there is the years we were writing about on How I Met Your Mother. The idea of being in your 20s, living in New York City, going out to bars, feeling a little lost, but having your friend group and everyone's kind of trying to find their way. Those years for me and Carter were spent writing for Late Show with David Letterman in New York City. Oh. The bar in How I Met Your Mother, it's called McLaren's, named after the last name of our assistant, Carl McLaren at the time, who was our assistant and became our dear friend.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we named it after him, not to diminish naming it after him because he's a wonderful guy, is we also wanted it to be a name like that, a good kind of Irish pub name, because the actual bar it was based on in New York City was McGee's, which is the pub on 55th Street, all the Letterman crew, the Late Show with David Letterman crew, would go to and drink on Thursday night after the double taping. We would tape the Thursday night show in the afternoon, and then the Friday night show in kind of the evening. 2 shows, and everybody would go blow off steam, getting drunk at McGee's, and you're drinking with Pat and Kenny and all the writers. And I mean, we'd be packed into that bar every Thursday night. If you watch How I Met Your Mother and then you visit McGee's, which does still exist, a lot of the Irish pubs in New York have gone out of business. And I like to think that How I Met Your Mother has helped keep this one open.
Oh, that's cool.
McGee's on 55th between Broadway and 8th Avenue, still to this day. And it's become a little bit of a How I Met Your Mother theme bar. And we would do that. Those were our 20s. We would go there and party and hang out. And if you look at the design of that bar to this day, it has these red booths, it has these green walls, it has these big murals up on the wall. All of those touches we stole for the set design of How I Met Your Mother. We copied the booths, we copied the vibe, the green color, some of the lamps. We said to the set designer, here's one of many strange connections between the Letterman world and the How I Met Your Mother world. We hired our set designer, Steve Olson, who won multiple Emmys production designing How I Met Your Mother. And he, it turned out, had lived right over, I don't know if it was literally next door to the building that was over the Ed Sullivan Theater, but on one of those Let's Meet the Neighbors early shows, right, in 1993, Dave sent the camera up. All right, let's go into the building next door, and we'll go and knock on somebody's apartment door. Door opens. It's Steve Olson.
Oh my gosh.
That designer, our production designer for How I Met Your Mother. We only discovered this after we had already met Steve and fallen in love with him and wanted to hire him because of his amazing work and portfolio. It turned out he had been on the air as one of the Let's Meet the Neighbors segments. And in that segment, Dave had said, all right, they chit-chatted with him at his front door and came into his apartment. He said, come on down here. Steve runs down, gets into the Ed Sullivan Theater and sits, I believe, with Dave. And they say, all right, this is Steve Olson, our neighbor, everybody. And I think Steve to this day has an awesome picture of him sitting on the guest chair with Dave. So when we met Steve Olson and we're looking to hire a scenic designer for How I Met Your Mother, we said, I know you probably won't know this. There's a lot of bars in New York City, but there's this bar called McGee's on 55th Street. He's like, what are you talking about? That used to be my local bar.
Oh my God.
I go there all the time. And and I also, by the way, I was on the air as a Let's Meet the Neighbors guest on Letterman. So we knew right away we had this kind of mystical, weird connection to Steve Olson, our set designer, who went on to win, I think 3 Emmys for production design on How I Met Your Mother. And there's just this weird overlap of the Letterman years and the How I Met Your Mother years there. And it is not the only one of those. I
have to have Steve on. Is Steve still around? He's still.
Oh, yeah.
I got to have him on. I got to hear that story.
Yeah. Oh, he's the
ironic
best guy.
thing is that Steve has had probably more contact with Dave than 90% of the writers who wrote for Dave. That is fantastic.
Yeah, it was so random.
Well, and I want to talk about the bar for a second here, because you bring up, and we're not going to make this a How I Met Your Mother podcast, obviously, that you've done lots of press and things about that. But at the end of the day, the two are related. And I love how we've started this show talking about that. I just want to talk about you and I growing up, a very similar experience when it comes to the reverence for Dave and company and how that changed created pathways in our minds. And I always talk about how I am the odd human that I am as an adult because of that show, because of the formative years at 12:30, that it's just the perfect synergy, that type of humor for that time of night. It was different when you watched it at night than when you watched it the next day on the, recorded it or whatever. It was different watching it real time. But that being said, a cultural phenomenon at that point was Cheers. And you would hear people who would make pilgrimages to go see the Cheers bar in Boston and come home disappointed because the experience wasn't, the sign was there and you get so excited and you go down under the street and then suddenly it's like, oh no, this isn't, no. And then upstairs they ended up doing something that was very similar, but it was way later on. Now that being said, you guys inadvertently, I would assume, just organically, you talk about these amazing natural kind of destiny type moments. You guys created from your experience this iconic place in New York that's still around, and you showed it on TV and give these people this experience. I assume Cheers had you have the same reverence for Cheers that I have, or at least the respect for it as a franchise. Isn't that interesting how you have created that with your sitcom?
It blows my mind. Cheers is my all-time favorite sitcom. All-time favorite sitcom by far, by a mile. Like I'd have to think about what is second place compared to Cheers. When we were launching How I Met Your Mother, our dream was that we said TV needs another great bar. It's been a minute. We're already going to get compared to Friends if we succeed. It can't be anything like a coffee shop. We all hang out at bars. Yep. New Yorkers in their 20s hang out at bars. It's not a coffee shop in our lives. We said, let's make it real. Let's make it a bar. And we wanted it to have that feeling of that kind of like dark, inviting, like Cheers, just like the look and feel of the Cheers bar is like heaven to me. Yep. It's like home. It became, I mean, and we wanted How I Met Your Mother to feel that way, to have that kind of dark, the sort of greenish, brownish kind of like, it looks a little bit like a nice dark whiskey or a scotch, you know, it has that color tone, kind of that amber, inviting, kind of warm tone. So we thought
slightly classy
and very East Coast and dark. Yeah. And we wanted it to feel like that. We didn't want it to be some bright overlit, like, no, it's a dark, inviting, warm New York pub, Irish pub. And that's what McGee's was like. And, you know, it pleases me to no end two things. One, that How I Met Your Mother had a bar that felt that way to people, the way that Cheers felt that way to me. Yeah, that blows my mind. And fans do say that to us sometimes. And I feel like honored by that comparison. But another, just in that this is a Letterman podcast, not a How I Met Your Mother podcast, the other thing that really pleases me is like, it's such a great Venn diagram overlap of these two of the most important things I've ever done in my life and will ever do in my life, which is writing for Dave Letterman for 4.5 years, and then creating How I Met Your Mother. And McGee's is this great Venn diagram overlap of those two worlds, because that is the bar we base the bar on. If you go in and see those murals, and those big murals that were on the wall in the How I Met Your Mother bar, one of them's like 12 feet long, and there's another one. I mean, you have to sort of like go back and watch it and notice it, like, oh yeah, there's a huge long 12-foot mural in the back of the How I Met Your Mother bar, and then kind of a smaller like 5 or 6 foot one. Both of those pieces are up on the walls in my apartment in Tribeca right now that I'm talking to you. One of them's over we have a piano our kids sit and play piano at. They're sitting under one of the murals, and the other mural is in my bedroom. And it's me. Those exist because Carter and I said to Steve Olson, you know those murals? And McGee's, he goes, yep, I drank beers under them many nights. We said, we're going to rip off that and we're going to create something like that. And he said, yep, I know exactly what to do. And he made those, and they're up in my apartment to this day on the walls. And like those represent this great connection between How Much Mother and Late Show in my life. And so yeah, it's pretty awesome to think about that way.
Incredible. I've got two questions that come off that. The first one is going to be, so you got those murals from How I Met Your Mother, obviously different situation, because, you know, when you left Late Show, you went to kind of make your bones and all that. Once you made your bones, these are the types of things you can end up with as souvenirs from the show. The question is, did you keep anything from Late Show? So I'm going to ask you that. And then I want to ask you about these nights, these Thursday nights or whatever nights you ended up at McGee's. Did any fans of Letterman or enthusiasts of David Letterman know, wait a second, like there's a pattern here. The writers from Letterman would show up here. And did anybody ever want to come out and party with the writers? I know I certainly would have, had I known a piece of information like that and been in New York at the time. But did you save anything from Late Show?
First of all, no one ever wants to party with the writers. They're like, writers? Wait, there's writers? I didn't know writers exist. I thought Dave was making all that up off the top of his head. No. And I wrote there from 97 to 02. Yeah. So the internet was not as much of a thing. It makes me sound so old to say, but of course now you could look up anything. You can find out what's the How I Met Your Mother bar, what's this bar. It was a local bar up there. So you had a lot of people just like from the area, and people that worked, maybe people like crew guys from other Broadway shows, crew guys from Letterman, just very down and dirty. It was very like you had to know it. You know, that was just the Letterman bar. And it felt like we took it over every Thursday night. Like you looked around and there was almost nobody that hadn't just worked on the show. Maybe every once in a while we had somebody pop in and go, hey, that's Pat and Kenny, or someone would chat us up a little, but not that much. And now if you go to McGee's, it's like very much like a How I Met Your Mother tourist destination stop. You go in there and people, this is that bar. It was the Late Show bar before it was the How I Met Your Mother bar. And I think it was much more of a secret back then. You had to know. But no, we left Late Show in 2002, and I think we just, took personal odds and ends from there. It wasn't like the end of a run. We weren't sitting there like, let's steal this set item or that item. So I don't really have anything like from that. But you know what I do have that's literally on my desk right now that I was just looking at in thinking about talking to you? This is that Late Night with David Letterman writer's book. That was like, have other people talked about this? I'm doing
no, not on the show. I know exactly. Yeah, no. Let's talk about it.
I was looking through this because in talking to you, I was thinking about what the old show meant to me too, what the late night show meant to me. And for people that aren't watching this video, I'm holding up the Late Night with David Letterman, the book from the 80s that I was trying to figure out how I got this book when I was a teenager. And because I was actually asked my mother recently, I said, did you get me this book? Do you know who gave me this book? Or was I somehow clever enough as a teenager in the 1980s to find a way to get this book? Because I don't remember it. The reason that point feels important is it's like a life-altering thing. I was going to give my mother the credit. I was like, if you got that book for me somehow for my birthday, this like changed my life, because the book is a collection of like written material by the late night writers, right? And sort of it's stuff that aired, but it's also like funny essays that the writers wrote. Each writer that was on staff wrote a little personal essay, and it communicated to me the existence of writers. Like I would study the credits and look at these names as an aspiring teenage writer wanting to write stuff like this. And so that book, if you're asking me about like cherished items related to Letterman, that book was the holy grail to me. That book as a teenager, studying every word of that book and seeing it gave you the idea too that like this material on TV could be in hard copy form, right? There was the scripted form. So if you page through that book, some of it's just they took the bits off of TV and sort of put it in a book form. Some of it they probably wrote new copy to sort of frame pieces. They probably added stuff. And my God, it was like it was the Bible to me. It was just one of those things where it was just like, it taught me comedy writing. It was probably the first thing that really taught me comedy writing. I remember I got that. I got like a Monty Python script book and like a Fawlty Towers script book. And those things as a teenager are what made me understand what that job was, even that it existed, that you could write stuff like that. It wasn't like I was finding scripts of Cheers on the internet or something. There was no internet. I would have loved to have gotten that stuff, but I didn't. So these were some of the first like words on paper that I ever studied that communicated the idea of comedy writing to me. And so that is one of my most cherished Letterman related items, but I've had it since I'm probably 15 or something.
Craig, I'm going to ask you to come back on here and talk about this stuff because clearly we're kindred in the sense of this. I remember getting my first Kevin Smith script bootlegged from a local comic book shop in Vancouver, and I can remember. I know what you're talking about here. Reverence for writers. The reason that I'm precursing it with this is let's talk a little bit about at the current time while we are recording this. We're seeing another writer's strike, and it seems like every decade or so since I've been a little boy, I remember seeing these writer strikes that would come up from time to time as the times change. The protection of how precious what writers do is, I love that you kind of segued into that right now. The WGA is on strike. I'm going to New York in a couple of weeks. I plan on finding a bunch of old Letterman writers and picketing with them for one day, if possible, because it's really, really important. It's always unprecedented times when things like this happen, so we can kind of set things up where writers can be free to have a career in writing. And it isn't something that you have to be, wealthy or independently, making money doing something else to be able to do, to do this, in my opinion, gift that comes from within, that gets inspired from the universe. You talk about these series of events for you that led you to becoming a writer. Reverence for writers. I just am so supportive of what's going on right now. How goes the strike?
It's funny. I think the strike is about issues that are existential to the job of being a TV writer and a movie writer. There was no avoiding this strike, and it will set the tone of what this career is for like the next generation coming. And my feeling of support for the strike comes for the younger writers, the people the people who were the age I was when I got hired to write for Dave Letterman.
Yeah.
Carter and I were 22 years old when we got hired to write for Late Show with David Letterman.
God.
We were right out of college. It was a complete fluke, and we had opportunities before us to get those types of jobs, and to make a living at those jobs that younger people now aren't getting. Yes. And I'm in the second half of my 40s now. Yep. I'm at an age where I can look back a little bit and feel just so lucky, and then sad and a bit guilty that younger writers aren't having these same opportunities that I had. That's not how this is supposed to work, right? We're supposed to, in every category of the world, we hope to give the next generation something better than what we got. That's not happening in every
It's going backwards right now.
If we continue. And in this category, it's true too, where it's like we have to do something to improve this. One of the things I loved, it's funny you would bring up the writer's strike, because the 1988 writer's strike, I think that's when it happened.
Yeah.
Would have been 12, 13 years old, right?
Yep.
And so that was pivotal. Young Craig Thomas falling in love with late night with David Letterman years, peak formative years of me finding that. Which again, just it's hard to communicate this to younger people. Maybe there was no internet. There was no show like this show. Maybe Saturday Night Live, obviously in the 70s and the 80s, did have that kind of like secret club. There was something dangerous and weird happening late at night. Aside from that, the TV landscape in the 1980s was very there was a lot of artifice. There was a lot of phoniness.
Yep.
There was a lot of just sort of homogenized, ridiculous, so prepackaged, plastic-feeling television.
Yep.
So the feeling at 12:30 at night to turn on NBC and see this like secret, weird TV clubhouse that was the late night show, and just see this bizarre deconstruction of a talk show. It was like it was commenting on itself in real time. It had this self-analytical postmodern detachment. It was talking about being a show while also being a show.
Yes.
And the reason I go to that long preface is to say this: when the Writers Guild strike happened in 1988, I was a 13-year-old growing up on Long Island who was made acutely aware that there was a Writers Guild strike happening. Why? Because Dave Letterman talked about it every night on his show.
Me too. Hal Gurney's Network Time Killers introduced me to the
Network
idea.
Time Killers.
Yep.
Like they would make fun of the fact that they had no writers.
Yep.
And they would do for people listening that don't know this reference, Hal Gurney was the director. And because they had no written material, Dave would say, okay, we're going to do something now called Hal Gurney's Network Time Killers, wasn't that it? And they would just go talk. They put a camera on in the control room and talk to Hal, and he would just do like dumb clips and dumb trivia, and like they were just killing time because they were. And if you think about that idea, first of all, it's classic Letterman, like kind of like opening up the hood of the car to show you how the car works.
Yep.
But the other thing it is subversively, and this is no accident, it is very much solidarity with writers.
Yes.
It is showing you the importance of writers by showing you the absence of writers. And every night of that strike, Dave showed you the absence of writers. And it indicated something about that show in general that was true before that writer's strike and after, and was true the whole time, which is that it was very writer forward, that show. Yeah.
Yes.
It made you know that jokes were written. Dave would comment about the material. If he didn't like something, he would make a joke about the written material, but he would also bring out writers, bring out Chris Elliott, bring out Jerry Mulligan. Writers would come out and be in bits, and the idea that this show was written by people. I mean, that's why this book exists that I was just blabbering on about. Late Night with David Letterman, the book, is a tribute to the written material of that show. It's not a Dave fan book. It is a writer's fan book.
Yep.
And that was unique about that show. It was very writer-centric, writer-forward. Dave himself is such a good writer. If you look at Dave's stand-up before the show and his involvement with the writing through the show, he's a wordsmith. He is brilliant with a turn of phrase. He cares about the specificity of word choice. He's always been a writer. He's a writer. He has a writer brain. And you always felt that on his show, including during that writer's strike. And I remember having this feeling of solidarity towards TV writers at age 13 because Dave was talking about it. How would I have ever known anything about that at 13 years old, but for Dave talking about that? So I think that just indicates Dave's reverence for writers.
I could not agree more. And I think about the different strikes that have happened over the years, and Dave's role in that, and not just Dave, but Worldwide Pants. And I think about the strike at the end of the aughts, when Worldwide Pants was actually able to make a deal outside of the guild to put pressure on everybody to make a deal. Bill Sheft has talked about that recently, and just it's happening again. And I love seeing a lot of these I love seeing Bill on the picket lines right now, and you've got these writers who have been around. Yourself, you're a writer that's been around. As a 13-year-old, you have these these ideals, and these things start to form, which lead to the lily pads of you getting to where you are now. And it's been stunted in many ways for 13-year-olds right now. And like a pool player, putting a nice leave on the table for the next shot. You guys are really, guys and gals are doing a really good job right now, I think, of standing up and standing strong in the face of streaming, in the face of AI, in the face of all these things that are happening. If we can get another decade or two of things figured out here, where people can have a pool that they can safely jump into to create a career, that is, that'll be a good day's work if that's the case. And I think that's what this strike is about. And if I have it right, from my little spot in Western Canada, that's what's happening here. How can people support these writers? What's the best way right now for people who are awakened to these things that are happening out there, that do have appreciation for these art forms that we love so much and how they're created right now? What are some ways that we can help support the writers?
Well, I just this past weekend I saw a pretty fun viral video bit of civil disobedience, which is when the head of Warner Brothers got up to speak at Boston University at the graduation.
The guy at the sign? Are you talking about the sign?
All the wonderful young humans graduating drowned him out. His speech pontificating on his career and his journey drowned him out with the chant of "Pay your writers, pay your writers." And as a writer, it was hard not to enjoy that. It was hard not to enjoy the multi-millionaire representative of this side of the other side of the coin, the AMPTP, who have been finding ways to devalue and diminish writers. Him hearing that from a bunch of 21-year-olds heading out into the world is wonderful.
Yes.
I think when people make their voice heard and say, hey, I'm aware, it's the same thing I was saying about Dave making 13-year-old me aware. When young people are aware that the things they love to watch and the things that define their lives, the shows, the movies, these are written by human beings who have every right to make a living at it, providing this content that makes billions of dollars for the studios. And it's an issue of honoring and valuing art and artists. So I think, I think any civil disobedience like that, if people want to cancel a subscription to something and make it known that they're doing that until the writers get a fair deal, if they want to just be noisy and find ways to write to, to Netflix, to Amazon, to different places and say, hey, I'm going to cut the cord on you. I'm going to turn you off. I'm going to end my subscription unless you do this. I think people being vocal and showing that. I guarantee you that dude who got heckled at the college commencement, I guarantee you he went home that night, no matter how rich he is, and thought, man, that was embarrassing and sucked. I just got heckled. The video's going viral. A bunch of young people were yelling at me, this big rich CEO, to value artists and pay writers. It's great. I think that's how to do it. I think they did it this past weekend. Those kids did it. These young adults. The other thing I would say, the other big issue about this strike that I think is very indicative of how I learned to be a TV showrunner. There's this issue of experience, and I'll tell you what I mean. The experience of getting to not just write for a show, but write through the production of the show. Be the writer on set for a show. Be there on set as the on-set writer, guiding that production, rewriting it, solving problems, working with the actors, working with the director, being a writer who is paid to stay on through the post-production of that show. The writer that sits in the edit room with the editor and maybe the showrunner and shapes that episode and sees it through. The writer that gets to sit in the writer's room, take it to set, take it to the edit room, lock picture, go to the sound mix. Here's why that's important. When Carter and I wrote for Late Show with David Letterman, we learned only after leaving there to Los Angeles and writing on a couple of sitcom staffs, we learned something that we didn't know because we were ridiculously young newbies on Letterman. On Letterman, and I'm sure other writers on the show have talked about this, a great thing is when you would pitch an idea for like a video piece, you were responsible for every beat of it. You had the idea, you wrote the script. If that script got approved, you were handed back the script with a little check on it. It said, great, we approved your little videotape skit or your mailbag letter, whatever it is. Go make this. Then what you did was you took the script and you talked to the director. You talked to everyone involved in production about what you needed for that shoot. You talked to Sue Hum in wardrobe. You talked to these sound effects people. You talked to music clearances. If you wanted a specific song, you had to clear that song to use it. And you went and you with the director, kind of co-directed and shot the piece that you wrote. You were on set, you're working with the actor, you're working with the camera people, you're working with the director. You get that shot, you take that to the edit room, you order up the sound effects you need, you call up graphics, you call up Chiron, you say, I need this text, you say, I need this graphical element that needs to be created before I'm in the edit room, because if I'm in the edit room, I don't have that, I can't finish it. And you bring your music. You literally, back in that day, because I was there 97, 02, we were bringing down CDs. We're like, okay, it's track 6, input this is the music we need. But then halfway through, it switches to this other music cut that's on this CD, and you had it and you uploaded those songs, and then you chose the parts of the songs you wanted. You sat with the editors, you put all of the graphics and the music and whatever together. Doing that for 4.5 years is what taught me how to be a TV showrunner. Because what I learned when I moved to Los Angeles is a lot of sitcoms wouldn't involve their writers in parts of that process. Some did and some didn't. Sometimes you'd meet writers who had years of sitcom experience and they go, oh, I never sat in an edit room. I don't know how editing works. And you go like, so on How I Met Your Mother, we made this huge point of every writer is involved with every beat of this. They're on the set for the whole shoot. They're in the edit room for every part of it. They go to the sound mix. And the reason I'm saying all of this is that that's what writers nowadays, young writers, are being robbed of, because these giant companies don't want to spend the extra money to have an on-set writer and have a writer and edit. They're working off a false premise that writing is something that happens before the shoot and then the paycheck can be cut off at that point, and there's no more need for a writer. That is an objectively terrible and flawed idea, because you're constantly tweaking things and rewriting things on a set. Editing is rewriting the editing choices. If you have a narration and a voiceover, you're rewriting that. Every editing choice, you're writing. The writing doesn't stop until the picture is locked and the sound is mixed. All of it's writing. So anyway, I always loved that Late Show treated writers that way and involved writers in that way and taught you how to do that. Not every sitcom did that in Los Angeles, but some did. We always tried to on How I Met Your Mother. And then now seeing that is effectively now this kind of financial point within the writer's strike. It's one of many grievances writers have. When you shrink down writers' paychecks and shrink down the number of days you want to pay them for, you cut out a huge part of what writing actually is, which is the entire process.
I could not. That is wonderfully said. We're going to take this video and we're going to cut this part out even before the release of this show. And we're going to get it out there. And hopefully, anybody who listens to Craig talking about this, that is in some sort of a position that can help affect this protection of this amazing craft. We're going to try and get that. If we can help with that, we will, because I support this 100% what you're talking about here. Thank you very much for talking about this. You've also provided a really nice little springboard over here. The collaboration that you're talking about of a writer with the rest of the production. how fortunate you and Carter were that you could be part of that. You could literally learn how to not just write something, but take it and produce it all the way to the end with these amazing things. And you and Carter in particular, like, it's funny talking to people after that came after you guys were legendary for the mailbag segments. Like there are writers who came along after you were like, oh man, those are big shoes to fill, because so much of the mailbag was, somebody asking a little question, which would lead to, okay, well, we could produce this, and you produce a little short film. I got to ask you about, because it's one of my favorite moments of all time. The scene with Alan, where Alan goes into this descent of madness with White Rabbit playing and all of this stuff. I had it on my DVR. I'm not kidding you, Craig. I had it on my DVR for years, and if I had a shitty day, I'd come home sometimes and I would watch. It just hit me so perfectly. And when you talk about this process, I can think of nothing better than that clip. So if for folks who are wondering what we're talking about, if you go to the Letterman channel, you watch Carter Bay's and Craig Thomas's staff favorite moments. At the very end, thank you, Walter, plays the entire clip, including having the clearance for White Rabbit in there. I don't imagine that was cheap. So I got to ask that question. So you guys have the sailor sketch, him sitting in the sailor suit. I got to ask, did Dave improvise the line of "thank you for bringing your own suit"? And second, going through that, the sound effect of him in the elevator, then White Rabbit playing, as he's doing this, and all these things happening. Did you guys see that exactly in the process that you described? And when it's something like White Rabbit, does that give you 4 or 5 extra days because you got to get a clearance for this music, or could that be done on the fly? Like, this couldn't have been something you did in 24 hours, could it?
No, I mean, first of all, it's thrilling that you felt that way about that piece, because it's one of the single most insane things we did in our 4.5 years on the show. And that's saying something, because we did some legitimately crazy shit on the show. If I can, yes. I assume I can curse on here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I didn't even ask. We did some crazy shit on that show. This was the craziest shit we ever did on the show. I mean, it is bonkers, that thing.
Yes.
And it is on our staff memories. That's something great that I will give a shout out to Walter, Kim, and Barbara Gaines, and everybody working on the Letterman YouTube channel.
Yes.
Fantastic that they're doing that. They're curating all of this material that was previously, maybe you could find a clip or a fan had an upload, or some of it was late, Letterman sanctioned, and some of it. But this is, they've created this great kind of curated hub and compendium that you can find stuff on. It looks great. It sounds great.
Yep.
It's fantastic. So thanks to them for doing that.
Absolutely.
And when we were doing our staff favorite memories, they shoot you doing an interview piece. And what you realize as you're going into the interview, you're like, whatever I talk about, they're going to have to dig up and dust off and shine up all pretty and put it in this piece. So we were like, I definitely wanted to talk about that one, because I wasn't sure if fans could find that or not anymore. I think at one point, over the years, I tried to find that piece. I think when Alan passed away, actually, I wanted to try to find that piece, and I couldn't. And I remember thinking, I think we reached out to Don Giller or something. I think he found it. He built a great Alan reel, so you could find it within that. But that's like a big old huge piece. You have to find it. It's somewhere in there. Now it's sort of curated on the Letterman YouTube channel, so it's great. My point in saying all of that, other than to compliment the fact that they're doing that, the Letterman folks, my bigger point here is 1997 to 2002 is when we were on the show. Yep. I remember looking back on it years later, when we were making How I Met Your Mother or something, we'd sometimes think of old bits we did on Letterman, and we would lament as the years passed and like YouTube became a thing. And there was viral clips, and now every late night show, half of the way those shows are consumed is in small bits on the internet and on Twitter, on this and that, and on Instagram. And so things were excerpted and could be found and traded by fans, and nothing was ever lost. You could find everything. Not so from 1997 to 2002. If you didn't see it, I mean, DVR was new, Mike.
Yes.
The fact that you even had a DVR'd and could and like kept it, that was special. So the reason, this is a very long way of saying thank you for because you write these weird things like that, and it's like a little message in a bottle. You're on your deranged desert island, me and Carter and whoever else we're writing these things with. You're just these crazy people on your little deserted island of madness, and you write your little message, you slip it into the bottle, and you toss it out into the ocean.
Yep.
And you say, I hope this weird message in a bottle drifts through the ether and finds somebody, and someone will find this and get it. And you have to take it on faith a little bit. In 1999, 2001, there was a Letterman, there was a great website that, again, Walter Kim and Jay Johnson did, that you got, you could be messaged on that website, and there were like forums you could see comments on, so you could get a little feedback from fans then, but it was in the nascent stages, right? It was not a thing to get like fan feedback all the time. So a lot of the time you took it on faith. You're like, I hope this finds somebody, the way that the crazy shit they did on Late Night with David Letterman on some random Tuesday in 1989 found me. Found 15-year-old me. And meant the world to 15-year-old lost in high school. My parents are divorcing. Things are hard. But there's this message in a bottle of this crazy shit that's being beamed out at 12:30 to 1:30 at night on NBC. And it finds you. And the idea of writing something like that would find somebody else in that same way and stick in their head, that's the dream. I mean, that is the absolute dream. That's a very long, grandiose answer to talk about something as insanely dumb and stupid as this Alan piece, which is Alan's descent into madness because his sailor skit gets canceled. I mean, he goes on an Apocalypse Now descent into madness because he can't do his sailor skit, whatever that was supposed to have been. And I recommend if people go watch it, simply not because it's such a brilliant piece of writing, but Alan Kalter should have won some type of special Emmy award for that piece alone. He is a genius in it. He committed entirely to. We would have Alan do so many insane things, and God bless him, he was so game to just 100% commit.
Yeah.
And it was, it was great. I'm so thrilled that piece meant that to you.
Well, okay, so yeah, I got to tell you this, I was devastated because I did have one of the early DVRs, and the early DVRs were synonymous for, crashing, and then you got to go back to the cable company, get a new one or whatever. And that's what happened. I had it for years though. And I had that clip saved. It was sitting there. I would watch it because to me, it perfectly encapsulated Late Show. We'll talk about Alan Kalter right now because one of the lily pads of this show coming into existence was Alan passed. And I was like, God damn it. Like, there's a guy who would have been on a show like this, whoever did this show. And I'm so grateful that it got to be me. It's the most joy I get outside of my family. It's the most joy I get in my entire life is doing this show, which says a lot about me. But Alan would have done a show like this once a month. He would have just loved to do this from everything. I only had one teeny tiny little interaction with him. And when he passed, it was like, oh my gosh, we have to do this because we're losing people. We're starting to lose.
That helped inspire it a little bit, huh? Helps inspire.
Not just a little bit, a lot. It was a
That's
huge,
lovely.
huge,
Isn't
huge
that lovely?
In the Avalanche.
What a lovely tribute to Alan and to the show. I agree with you completely. When they asked us to come talk about staff memories, I wanted to talk a lot about Alan and a lot about Kenny because we've lost them both. We lost Kenny too. We got to write some of my favorite things we ever wrote in our 4.5 years there were for those guys. And I mean, to answer your practical question, that particular piece, that wasn't something quick. We shot that over weeks. We had to shoot, right? There was a lot. Every now and again, you chose something to go bigger on, right? Because there was sort of these tiers and levels of work you put into things, and some things had to be topical and you turned them around very quickly, same day or 2 days, 3 days. But the things that interested me more and Carter more and the head writer at that point, Rodney Rothman, who co-wrote that Alan piece with us. What interested us most of all were the weird things that were timeless and bizarre and kind of could stick in your head, and you kind of can look at them right now, and they're not diminished in any way by time passing. I hear Conan O'Brien talk about this a lot when he talks about his show. Conan said he didn't want to be a topical show. He wanted to do timelessly silly, ridiculous things. And I really relate to it when he says that. This is that Alan Descent into Madness piece. That's a perfect example. It's just completely abstract. It's so bizarre. Alan interrupts the show. I mean, Alan basically just hijacks the show to talk about his sailors. He's dressed like a sailor, and and in this bright white, old school, like 1940s sailor costume. And he says, and Dave lets him know they won't have time for his sailor skit, whatever that was going to be.
By the way, did he improv that line where he said,
"Oh yeah, that was Dave's line. That was Dave's
I love
line.
that. I knew it, and I love it, and I'm glad that you're saying that right now. That's excellent.
That's another little side point.
Because that must have delighted you, seeing him improv that line for that piece.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's an interesting side point. I want to take 2 seconds to pay Dave a compliment.
Yeah.
Just to say, you'd write these little scripted intros for things, and sometimes Dave would kind of do your scripted intro, and it would be fine. But whenever he would deviate from it would become so much better. Like Carter and I also created that piece, Pat and Kenny read Oprah transcripts, which I was so honored became like a runner. It happened many, many times over the years. And even after we left, they kept doing it. Just like a dream to get like a runner, like one of those bits they go back to. And I wrote some like little generic intro, here our stagehands are going to read these Oprah transcripts. Tonight they welcome a celebrity guest, whatever. Oprah welcomes a celebrity guest, whatever it was. Very bare bones. But Dave takes that and he goes, "Have you heard about this, Paul? You know what you can do is you can right away and get the Oprah transcripts and put everything they say on the show, so you can act them out at home in your living room. So you can just act out the Oprah episodes in your." I even just did this whole bit about how so you can just right there in your living room, you just sort of paint this picture of this quaint like living room scene where you've gotten these Oprah transcripts and you're acting them out at home, and it just made that intro so much better. And he would almost always riff like that when he introduced that piece, and I always loved it better than anything I could have come up with. And so too with this, I assume you brought your own sailor costume in from home, Alan. It's genius. It elevates everything before the piece even starts. It's already great.
Well, and as a writer, that's what you guys want. Because again, I mean, how many writers have we talked to who never met Dave? Literally had no contact with the guy. Quite literally. I'm not even being hyperbolous there. There are people who went through an entire writing run for the show that they loved and worshipped and never met the man. I never had any contact. And so part of the urge or the desire is to tickle Dave. If you can tickle him, if you can kind of, get him invested in whatever piece it is, there's a special satisfaction, a unique satisfaction for those folks. And to have him do that, that's a huge thing. And I love that. I literally, I don't know how many times on this show, I'm pretty sure I asked Tommy about it. I'm pretty sure I asked Joe and Jeremy, like, who wrote this piece in particular, this one here that we're talking about here. I'm so grateful to be talking about this with you right now. It's not even funny.
It took
weeks. Okay.
It took a lot of work because it was there were like stunts in it practically. We had to, Alan like takes a baseball bat to a television set. He destroys a room. We had to like build an office set that he could destroy safely. And like we were shooting, like crazy camera angles. And like it was a movie, that thing. It was like, so it was an elaborate pre-taped piece. I think at first we weren't sure if we're going to do it as a mailbag letter or like just its own interrupt. I think it ended up airing as a mailbag letter, if I recall correctly, but we were building the piece to be its own thing either way. Yeah. And then sometimes those bigger pieces became a mailbag letter. Sometimes they didn't. But to get the, late night with David Letterman was more of a crazy mad scientist laboratory than Late Show with David Letterman, right? It
Definitely.
was more mainstream. I don't think it's sacrilegious to say that.
No, there's an evolution that happened.
Yeah. And they were two different shows at two different time slots and different networks fulfilling different roles. But I will say that I always felt on Late Show, even though it wasn't quite as mad scientist as the old late night show, there was always room, because Dave always had this part of his brain that liked this stuff. There was always room to do something subversive that was abstract and weird and that kind of deconstructed the medium in the way that the old late night show used to. There was always room to do that still at Late Show. For me, that's the stuff that I love most. I don't feel like my strength as a writer is writing like topical jokes about like opening the newspaper and being like, by the way, you had to do that. You had to write topical jokes. There was jokes. And we did plenty of topical things. But the stuff that really spoke to me and also to Carter were these more elaborate movies we got to make and elaborately edited, elaborately shot, elaborately put together. And when we left after 4.5 years, it was because we wanted to build on that and go and within making How I Met Your Mother, that was a very ambitious sitcom. It was a sitcom on CBS, but we would do 80 scenes in 22 minutes. And it was like packed and crammed and edited. And we were always trying to sort of stretch the form and be very sort of cinematic. And Late Show is where we learned how to do that, where we built confidence to do that by making pieces as insane as this Alan Kalter piece was. So I'm thrilled that it meant that to you.
Well, and I could literally do it. Obviously, we could do an entire episode on this piece alone just because of my enthusiasm for it. There's so much about it that I just appreciate. As far as I'm concerned, it is a 10 out of 10 from beginning to end. Perfect encapsulation of what David Letterman is. And again, you did a really good job of setting the table. Like, this feels like the child of a Steve O'Donnell bit from Late Night. Like, it really does. It feels, or Meryl. Like,
that means the world to me, Mike, because those were my heroes.
There you go.
When I held up this book earlier, that I'll hold up once more, the Late Night book that celebrated late night writers, Steve O'Donnell is in that book. Steve O'Donnell was a hero of mine. To write something born of that spirit, it was, it's a dream come true to have that opportunity to do it. If it felt that way to you, then that's very gratifying to hear.
Very, very much so. And actually, it leads to my next question, like the legacy of, the appreciation, reverence for writers. Have you gotten a chance, because doing this show, again, it brings so much delight because I get to talk to people from all of the different eras. When you talk about, what Late Night was, and how it made fun of itself, it made fun of pop culture and all that. Having Dave Rogalski on here, who was a college student and had his girlfriend literally had, when People Magazine came out, she had things on her wall from People Magazine all over her dorm room wall. Then when Late Night with David Letterman comes out, within 3 months of that, she's ripping them all off of the wall. And a few months later, he's working for Late Night with David Letterman. Like, he was there. So that's like the father or the grandfather of where Late Show writers were at. Have you gotten a chance to talk to some of these legacy writers from the Letterman camp and meet some of these people?
Definitely yes, but not as much as I would like. I think I met Steve O'Donnell once in passing when I was very young at like a Writers Guild East function in New York. I think we crossed paths and I was like this skinny 23-year-old guy or something, and I was like, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr." And I was nerding out on him. I mean, the cool thing was,
I still get that way when I talk to Steve there, Craig. I'm still that way. I get dumbstruck every time I talk to him.
I always loved and never ceased being starstruck by these writers like Jerry Mulligan and Steve Young that straddled both shows.
Yes.
And so when 22-year-old Craig Thomas shows up to Late Show with David Letterman, as having been a super fan of the old Late Night show, when I met Jerry Mulligan, that was like meeting Tom Cruise to me.
Absolutely.
If Tom Cruise were a giant bearded Irish late night writer, and Jerry Mulligan is this like 6'3" hulking bearded teddy bear, hilarious, like subversive teddy bear who is faster than anybody and will take the piss out of everybody in that room in the most hilarious and lovable way. I was absolutely starstruck by him. He was on the air all the time on the old Late Night show. He and Chris Elliott would come out and do bits, and Chris Elliott was like, again, like a Tom Cruise level star in my mind. And I know Chris would lose his mind at me saying such a thing. But and to transition there, we got to have Chris Elliott on How I Met Your Mother. He played
multiple times, like 10 times or something like that, right?
He played Allison Hannigan's father.
Yeah.
Lily Aldrin's father, a frustrated board game inventor, and who invented some very questionable board games. And we got to work with him over the years and became friends with Chris. And now he's like somebody that I'm friends with, but I can't ever fully step away from looking at him like this star, I'm starstruck still by him. Jerry Mulligan's my friend. Steve Young is my friend, but I will still, start dorking out and quoting old jokes from like Steve Young. There was this top 10 list that I will just quote the wording of this one top 10 joke because I discovered at some point when I was at Late Show that Steve Young had written it. Remember all the old top 10 books that are behind you as we speak? I'm looking at your mantle. I'm looking literally at, okay, wait, this was the other one I was paging through.
There we go.
We have a match. I was getting in the mood to talk to you by looking at these books.
Yeah.
I remember just funny how some of these little bits of wording, again, these messages in a bottle that find people. It's not even the greatest top 10 list of all time, but it was it was like from the 80s, top 10 Mrs. Paul pet peeves. Mrs. Paul, the frozen fish stick company. Top 10 Mrs. Paul pet peeves. Some random, Tuesday night in 1989, this airs or whatever. God knows when. And it was just a bunch of like pet peeves that would be true of someone manufacturing frozen fish sticks. And one of them was this line that somehow I discovered that Steve Young wrote that was the flat, accusing stare of a dying cod. And it pardon me, getting over a little cold here.
Accusing.
The flat, accusing stare of a dying cod. That's poetry.
Yep.
That is poetry. That's Emily Dickinson could have written that top 10 item.
It's intimidating. It makes me want to go home going, oh, I could never come up with that.
It conjures up this incredibly evocative image of Mrs. Paul watching a fish die that she's going to chop up and turn into fish sticks. And it's watching her with this flat accusing stare, judging her as it dies. And that's one of Mrs. Paul's pet peeves, apparently. Yeah. And I don't know how I probably just quoted that as like, because I always wanted the top 10 lists to be more like that. More timeless, like forget about the topical. Like that was, if I had a pet peeve about Late Show, it's like, I wish more of the top 10 list could have dabbled in those colors, that artistic palette. Some of them still did on Late Show. Sometimes you would do an abstract list or sneak in a weird joke like that, but they were a little more topical, right? It was the 11:30 show now. You were serving up the news of the day a little bit. I always loved that when you could just write something as poetic as that. So yeah, that's just to say, like, every now and again, while working with some of these guys, you'd quote the flat accusing stare of a dying cod, and Steve Young would go, I wrote that. Jesus Christ, you know what that meant? I remember that. I could quote you that verbatim from 10 years ago, 15, whatever. And so yeah, it was nice to work with a couple of those guys and get to like send them those appreciations. Because again, back in the day, they weren't getting to hear from fans as much. No. They weren't getting to hear people quote their joke.
They're in a vacuum. Yep.
Some of that, and you meet people along the way and you start realizing, oh, people like the show, but it was different. It was harder to get the sense of like fandoms, right? Like this is why like Comic-Con became a thing. This is why this is why fandoms on the internet. And now people can have more of a sense of people responding to it. That's good and bad, because you also get plenty of hate and tell you, this was terrible. This used to be better, blah, blah. But there's the upside of realizing like some of these weird things you craft and you pour yourself into in some weird way. I mean, that's what I love. The artistry put into something as dumb as that Mrs. Paul's pet peeves joke. The level of artistry put into something that incredibly stupid. Yes. That's the dream for me. So yeah, getting to overlap with some of those guys and getting to work with Chris Elliott. I mean, I always remain a little starstruck by the people that I was watching when I was a teenager.
Chris hasn't been on this show. I've had a couple little contacts with him and stuff. The thing that strikes me about him, because I mean I'm Canadian too, right? So Schitt's Creek, which was up here before it went down, and I'm so grateful that it got the due that it did, because again, talk about a show that encapsulates all of the things that we're talking about here, and Chris got to be a part of that. One of the most humble people I've ever met. I am dumbstruck by how humble Chris is about his body of work. And I don't want to tell tales out of school, but you talk about people. Jerry's another good example of this. And I mean, these are two guys that work together a lot on screen, certainly, who did the tonnage of gold that they mined and nuggets boulders of gold they found just to cast them aside. So the next day they could try and mine for more gold. And now these moments are coming out here. Jerry Mulligan wrote for Dave during monologues of guest shots of Johnny Carson's Tonight Show when Dave would guest host the show. It's history. I get equally starstruck. I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about some of these names. Steve Young, oh my gosh, legend. I'm just so grateful that I can message Steve right now, and I want to get some of these. One of the ideas for this show, the reason I went down this path with you here organically, I want to get like you and Steve O'Donnell on this at the same time and talk about the things that stayed the same.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. The idea of two different people that worked one on the late night era, one on the late show era, and similarities and differences in that experience, because they were different, right?
Totally.
There were great similarities and there was a great carryover of the aesthetic, but it also was different, and there were things that kind of didn't translate from the old show to the new show, and that's interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard people talk about that as much. That's a good
okay point. You're on the list. So we'll have you on with some of these guys. That'd be so much fun to deconstruct this stuff, because it is like, and I think we've used this example on the show before. Certainly I have with the recorder off with people. You and I are from a generation where I think Letterman led the charge in TV, but we also saw it in music, where we didn't like, our generation, Gen X, did not like what the establishment was giving us when it came to music. And that's the birth of the alternative music scene and all of that, which of course intermixed beautifully with Dave. You had writers who worked for late night in the vacuum, perfectly happy to be in the vacuum. And then when Dave decided, and evolution happened where he would become our generation's Tonight Show, our generation's Johnny Carson. Those writers said, nah, you know what? It's just like some of these bands that we would love growing up, and they didn't want fandom. They didn't want to be, or fans who were fans of a band when they were indie. Once the band blew up, they kind of lost the luster for those people. And Late Show, or Letterman's legacy, certainly has an element of that. Would you agree with that?
Hugely. I mean, and the translation from late night to late show was tough, because it was like watching your favorite indie alternative band get a massive hit album.
Let's play stadiums now.
And play stadiums.
Yep.
And of course, some of that fandom of that hypothetical band, because that happened too, would say, they've changed, they've lost something. And I'm sure there are fans of late night that said that about late show.
Yep.
And it's just different. Sitting there and trying to compare them is hard. I will say this. I loved it when I felt that original flame of the late night show stay alive into the late show universe. And the Alan Kalter Descent into Madness piece is an example of that.
Absolutely.
One thing I love that carried over from one show to the next was this kind of like egalitarian spirit that I think Dave brought to TV, which was, I'm going to give as much airtime to the stagehand as Julia Roberts is getting airtime tonight.
Yes.
I'm gonna let Alan Kalter hijack the act one of the show that's airing to millions of people to go have a 3-minute emotional meltdown about his sailor skit being canceled, or like Pat and Kenny read Oprah transcripts. One of the reasons I'm like, that's one of my most proud things I worked on at the show, because Pat Farmer was Oprah and Kenny was like, Barbra Streisand. And it was this idea of like, why can't they get as much airtime? But they're getting as much airtime tonight as some of the guests, or certainly as much memorable airtime. You're going to remember their time on the show as much as, whatever celebrity guest is on.
Oh my God, even more so than the celebrity guest promoting the movie or whatever. If they were there for something canned and Dave couldn't turn it into something, amazing. Yeah, the Pat and Kenny thing, that absolutely. Arthur Kelly is Mike Singletary. There's the times where Dave went up to him afterwards and said, "You saved the show tonight," because it was so. Yes. So anyway, I'm just making your point.
It elevated the people making the show.
Yes.
It said the people working on the show who are just like average regular folks. They're as important. They can be as funny and charming and engaging as the guests can. And that spirit of elevating those folks, and elevating, again, like that idea of the writer's strike, elevating the people that make the show, showing you the people that make the show as they're making the show, as they're performing the show.
Yep.
That and kind of pulling the curtain back, and the sort of fourth wall breaking of that spirit that began on late night continued to late show. And I always loved that, because it always felt like it was, Dave is at some level this guy from Indiana. He is this guy. He didn't like the fancy sort of phony glitzy showbiz side of things, and the way he showed you that was by who he chose to elevate and give a platform to and feature. And it was the writers, it was the stagehands, it was Biff Henderson, and it was Rupert G,
our boy Rupert.
Mike is sporting a very fine Hello Deli shirt. And that I feel like that's a great thing about Dave and Dave's roots, is valuing those folks as much or more than the celebrities that come on. And I always felt like that was one of the essential sort of spirits of the original show that did preserve to Late Show. And certainly there were differences, but I always liked the similarities.
Without a doubt. And I love the evolution. I love Late Show so much because of the evolution of the body of work. Hey man, I'm a U2 fan. Coincidentally, U2 and David Letterman just put that special out on Disney Plus, which shows the relevance of Dave today still. And I love that so much. I love, people talk about, how Rattle and Hum and Joshua Tree for U2 was a pivotal change, but I would submit that U2 has evolved from Boy all the way up to now. They've constantly reinvented themselves, constantly changed, while keeping some of those fundamental things that make them U2. The David Letterman and his body of work and the legacy of people who helped create that body of work, in my opinion, identical analogy. And the things that the DNA that carried its way all the way through was evident all the way up to the very last show. We talk about, as we're recording this, we've hit the anniversary, 8 years since Late Show went off the air. Thank goodness Dave didn't just go off into the night. With that last show, the last lead up to the last show, I mean, in my opinion, it's the greatest 6 weeks of television was the last 6 weeks. The culmination, it was an unbelievable crescendo into a coda, unprecedented. And I just loved that so much. Now you had, this big run with your sitcom, and as it kind of closed off, I can't not see parallels. You put everything that you have into this thing and it comes to an end. I guess I got a couple of questions about that. Does it cause you to be reflective? And when Letterman ended, you must have had a very interesting perspective on that, Craig. You have a unique perspective. You and Carter have a unique perspective because of the formative years training, building something, seeing it all the way through.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I felt emotional watching that era come to a close. You know what I mean? We actually went up there for the last show and sat in the writer's room and watched it air.
Awesome.
I hadn't been back to that writer's room in years and years. And the Letterman Worldwide Pants folks were nice enough to invite us to sort of the wrap party. I think a couple days later, I don't think it was that same night. It was like 2 days later, and we went and we shook hands with Dave and told him, hey, thank you for giving us a career, basically.
Yeah.
He was our first job in TV, and I already blabbered on earlier in this podcast about how much I learned working as a writer at Late Show that directly informed the hands-on nature of being a TV showrunner. You're in a writer's room, you're on the set, you're editing, etc.
Yep.
I tried to convey that to Dave in the 2-minute conversation we had at the party where he had to talk to 500 people.
Yeah.
But he was gracious and nice to us, and it was emotional. It was like I felt a connection to 15-year-old me, looking back in 2015, looking back to the late 1980s and realizing how much this meant to me. And I was so lucky to be a part of it for a little bit of it for 4.5 years. I was part of that. The fact that we wrote a few things that fans like you still remember and still like, to see that, you just hope that it gets remembered. And that's why it's great that you're doing this podcast. That's why the Letterman YouTube channel is great. Yeah. This idea of like keeping alive, there was so much great work that was done. And it's not how we're lucky with How I Met Your Mother. It's going to play in reruns forever because it's a sitcom and it airs, it all around the world it airs. A late night show, it's tougher because no one's like, I'm going to go back and watch like the February 23rd show from 1992.
Yeah.
And yet maybe there was freaking solid gold in that.
Absolutely.
Episode. And to go back through and kind of sift out some of that stuff, again, especially the timeless things that weren't like limited or tied to topicality. When you can excerpt that stuff and realize that those bits were created by people who went on to write for The Simpsons, who went on to create How I Met Your Mother, who went on to do cool shit later.
Yep.
That when they were younger, this was their formative material. Like this was and that people like Conan O'Brien wanted to be a Letterman writer. You know, Conan O'Brien, like the number of people this show influenced and sort of sent spinning out into the universe to create their own shit, and what that meant to comedy and pop culture. Like, it's, you know, the end of that show in 2015 was a good reflective moment. I loved hearing, again, people like Conan. I remember Conan had Dave on his podcast and talked about how much it meant to him, and just realizing, like, this show, you couldn't even calculate how many brains this show impacted, how many people it inspired and changed their comedic sensibility and stuff like that. And sort of it takes years passing to realize that impact. And you know, I'm still wrapping my head around that idea that I got to be part of that for 4.5 years. It's still a great honor of my life to have been part of that. So yeah,
I love how grateful you are about it. And again, I'm not surprised. There are so many echoes of clearly there was a culture there right from the very start, right to the very end. There are echoes of this similar culture. Part of it is none of y'all can take a compliment at all. Y'all seem to are really definitely good at deking around compliments. The other thing is gratitude.
No one better than Dave Letterman, though. No one better.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's from the top down.
We all learn from the top down. Yeah. If you take too many compliments, you lose your edge or something. You know? And Chris Elliott, Chris Elliott's terrible at taking a compliment.
Yes.
I'm just saying right now, Chris Elliott's a genius.
Yes.
And if he were here, he would start refuting that, but he's not here, so I just get to say it. And I say it, and now it just is out there. Chris Elliott's a genius. And yes, I think there is a shared sensibility of self-critique and self-analysis that Dave has and a lot of comedy writers have. And I think it's true. I think some of that is healthy, and some of that keeps you striving to be better and beat your first idea, not be lazy, not be self-congratulatory. And yet then there's this other side, but it's where at a certain point it's terrible, and you should just be able to feel good about what you've done and good about yourself. And I think it's a funny little psychosis we're hitting upon here, I think, that a lot of writers have. But
without a doubt. And the other thing, though, is grateful. And I can tell how grateful you are. Like, again, all of these people are eternally grateful. You know, we had Gabe Abelson on here, you know, and I mean, he had a run where Bill Sheff had left and Gabe became the head monologue writer for a number of years, and the gratefulness that is coming out of him still after all these years from this, you know, this small run in a small time, I think intersected with you guys as well. You know, just so grateful, and not just like all of you seem to just have this spirit of gratefulness, which is spectacular. Do you have a few more minutes for me here?
I do. Yeah, I have a couple more minutes.
Okay. Yeah. I appreciate that. Because I mean, again, I'm going to have you back on. We'll talk more specific moments and things like that. But I'm so grateful for this conversation as well, Craig. This is so much fun. I'm super curious about, so you and Kalter are here. You write as a team. He gave us a good impression of what writing as a team was like. And right from the very beginning, you know, Steve Weiner and Carl Tiedemann, you know, we're a team writer at the very beginning. You know, the Calvert Forest and the pencil through the glass and all that, they help create the DNA. And it seems like writer teams have been a part of the secret sauce that was David Letterman's productions. This, you know, always from beginning to end, there seems to be teams there, including you know, brothers who were co-head writers at one point. Can you talk a little bit about that? Talk a little bit about the process. What kind of a tennis match was it between you and Kalter? These assignments would come under the door all the time while you're still doing these big things and wanting to do, you know, opus type segments, but then the assignments come under the door and you need to do the day-to-day stuff as well. What was it like writing as a team versus some of the people who were more solo?
Yeah, I think it was very beneficial because there wasn't a ton of in the writer's room group writing at that show. There was there were certain pieces where you would all sit around a conference table watching video clips and writing jokes to that. And you'd have like a morning meeting where you'd pitch ideas a little bit and people would get assignments. But it wasn't like on a sitcom, you know, rewriting a script, sitting around a table. You could be there for days on end, all together in one room. It was not like that. There was a lot of peeling off to your office to write assignments. Again, like Kalter, I think, probably said to you, is like a memo would fly under your door and it would say more top 10 jokes by 1:45, whatever, or more jokes for this piece, more jokes for this. And you actually laid it out well, where it's like in between all of that, you're trying to also like write these bigger, crazy video pieces, or you're, planning something a little bigger, a little different, while keeping up with these kind of more newsroomy sort of like assignments.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it felt like you were working on a newspaper or something, because it was sort of you were writing topical
Yep.
things. Scale, you had a stack of newspapers. You were reacting to the news in the way that like journalists are in some way.
Yep.
Except obviously journalists are saying something real and we're saying really stupid shit. But you are moving on a certain rhythm like they are. And so yeah, I think what benefited us as a team is the ability to sort of like do those things all at once, where if one of us was like writing some longer, big, ambitious script, the other one could be like, I'll turn in top 10s for us. Everything's going to say both of our names, but maybe one of us is like hitting that top 10 assignment while the other one is like putting together that week's mailbag.
Right.
And again, we got lucky. We were very ambitious. We were there. We were young. We were very ambitious. We didn't know how in over our head we were. We were confident based on nothing. I mean, not really.
Blissful ignorance. Yep.
We were blissfully ignorant and ambitious based on nothing. We were plenty unconfident, actually, but we were ambitious, goddammit. We kept on asking for homework. We'd put our hand up and say, teacher, can we have extra homework? And that took the form of we volunteered to take over the mailbag at like
that's bonkers.
6 or 7 months in. Whoever was doing the mailbag had left, and there was an opening of running that segment. And we just ambitiously went to the executive producer. We said, give us the mailbag segment, because we were starting to get some stuff on the air. People sort of knew we were doing a pretty good job, and we put up our hand. God bless them, and for all the opportunities they gave to very young us. Every now and again, I stumble upon a photo of myself from my Letterman years, from age 22 to age 26. And in the photo, I look 4 years old. And I'm like, and Carter does too. And I'm in my 40s now. You kind of forget how different you looked 25 years ago.
Yep.
And you see it, and I just my initial feeling is immediate gratitude to the people at Late Show, and then the people at like CBS later that took Carter and I seriously at all. It took us seriously for 1 second because we looked 5 years old.
Yeah.
Somehow, looking that way, we raised our hand. We said, give us the mailbag segment, and we took it over. And so we were there 4.5 years. I think we did mailbag for 4 of those 4.5 years.
Yeah.
And the only way we could do that, I feel, was as a team, because mailbag was, you're writing basically 8 scripts a week. You're calling through real letters from viewers and stuff, and you're trying to come up with funny ideas off of that. So all week long, you're servicing that. You're trying to create 8 mailbag letter scripts, out of which you'll choose 4 that will be the mailbag segment on the Friday night show.
Wow.
And along the way, you're shooting pre-tapes with Dave one of the nights after one of the shows, like on Tuesday night or Wednesday night, whatever night. I think it shifted around. And so Carter, it's funny, you talked about some writers not having as much FaceTime with Dave, because it's true, as the show went on for years and years and years, Dave wasn't hanging out in the writer's room. He was like doing less. He was targeting his, how he used his time.
Yep.
Carter and I were lucky because I think we straddled those 2 eras a little bit, because we were the last people that were in charge of like comedic pre-tapes with Dave one night a week after the show. So one night a week after that night's show, Tuesday night or something, the dust would settle, Dave would go change, whatever, and then he'd come down and shoot skits with us for a little while. And Carter and I were in charge of that, because usually they were for the mailbag segment. Sometimes they were for something else. But we were in charge of that because it was mostly mailbag bits. So we got like FaceTime with Dave because of that. But yeah, and then at a certain point, Dave did less of that, and we left. And I think writers that came in after us had less exposure to Dave than we did. And we were jealous of an earlier era when Dave used to be more hanging out with the writers.
Collaborated on everything. Yep.
Again, he, and now as I get, when I worked for Dave, he's probably in his 50s or something. Yep. And as I now get into my later 40s, I'm like, I get it. I get being a little more tired, not wanting to sit around.
Oh yeah, smarter, not harder, all of that stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I mean, at the time in my 20s, with that energy that I had then, I'm like, why isn't Dave in this room with us? Because you would hear the old show. Dave used to hang out more. I kind of get it more now as I get a little older, but yeah, we basically got very lucky because we got to shoot all those bits with Dave while he was still doing it, and yeah. I ultimately, I feel like, again, the old show versus the new show, I feel like we were in a little bit of an overlap period between those two shows, because we got there in 97 and there was still, some maybe even more of a bridge between those two shows still then.
There is so much that you and I could just drill down on, and talk about all of these things. This is a beautiful first kind of episode. I got a one-off question that I've always wanted to ask a writer of Late Show that I haven't asked it yet. It just has always gone to the bottom. I'm going to ask it right now. I'm not a big fan of the Emmys, and watching award shows. There are some times where there'll be notable exceptions, like when Conan hosted or things like that. One of the things, though, that I would always DVR the Emmys, always, because I would fast forward to when you guys inevitably would be nominated for writing, and there would always be a videotape piece of and the writers for the late night for Late Show with David Letterman, and it was all of your names, but it would be to crazy, like a crazy videotape piece of horses or different things. Were you ever a part of that?
Yeah, excuse me. I always liked that too. And that was something I always liked about like Dave's brand. Dave, he would find a way to sort of sneak in his sensibility to things.
Yes.
You know, whether it was in print, whether it was like these books we're talking about,
Yep.
and even if it was a little opportunity like that. The one I remember, we certainly did things like that when I was there, and we were nominated. You know, each year we were there, we were nominated as a staff, and we went to the Emmys, and we would lose, and then we'd fly home, but it was fun anyway. We are many-time Emmy losers, Carter and I. We lost some Emmys for How I Met Your Mother, and we lost some Emmys for Late Show with David Letterman.
It was back then. It was
Never
Stewart who was cleaning up at that point, right? He was making his bones, and he was cleaning up. I think.
I think
was it Jon Stewart? Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think some of that. Yeah, there was a bunch of there, like whatever was the hot show then.
Yep.
And certainly it was great. Late night got to scoop up a bunch of Emmys when it was the newer, shinier thing. And
Dave did it to Johnny and Stewart did it to you guys.
The circle of life. There's no bitterness there.
Absolutely.
But yeah, the one I remember is just that, and I don't think it was my idea or Carter's idea, but it was funny, and it was, as the writers' names were listed, the pre-tape package showed bodies being disposed of, like dead bodies, corpses, like being thrown into the back of like garbage trucks and stuff. And then at the very end, the payoff of it, that they got this person I'm about to say to shoot a bit for, because of his respect for Dave. It was when The Sopranos was big, and you saw the garbage truck pulling away with a bunch of corpses, like mob disposed corpses in it, that were the writers. And the garbage truck pulls away, revealing James Gandolfini as Tony Soprano. And I think, God damn it, I feel like another actor from The Sopranos was with him. And people can probably look this up online. And was it Steven? Like who was with him? I think it was another Sopranos person. I can't believe I'm not remembering who it was. And they sort of like nod, like, all right, we disposed of all these bodies. Good job. And they nod at each other and walk off. And all the writers got whacked by Tony Soprano's crew, basically. Fantastic.
I've been wanting to ask that question for every time I've had a writer on here. I'm so glad to discuss this with somebody. I wish that there was a way. I hope there's a way, Walter, if you're listening or watching, if there's a way that you can get some of those and do a compilation of those on the official channel, that would be spectacular, because they were really, really funny. Oh my God, this is so much fun. Okay, so let's just go right to, I thank you for being so generous with your time here. Obviously, I'm going to bug you to come back on and do more of this. Favorite moments. I mean, obviously, your staff favorite moments segment did the big brushes. The Oprah transcripts was absolutely genius. I think, again, in the idea of pool playing, we had Jonathan Green on here talking about how, the Oprah transcripts thing happened, and then they put him and Gabe put a spin on, with Dr. Phil afterwards. I thought that was great.
Right.
Big moments that we've talked about here. Please watch the staff favorite moments. But what are some other, like, there's got to be a couple little tidbits when I ask this question of little things that you guys got on the show that maybe weren't staff moment worthy or whatever for the big tentpole compilation. Were there some moments maybe early on or that you're proud of that just come to mind that you guys got on the show? Was there anything else that you just really, really were proud of?
I mean, anything like that Alan Descent into Madness piece where it was sort of non-topical and just bizarre.
Yeah.
I always loved any opportunity to do something just super strange. To me, my favorite thing, and it still is one of my favorite things, is putting an incredible amount of work into something incredibly stupid.
Yes.
And and building on an idea, and I did talk about this in the staff memories, so forgive me for doubling it up, but like,
no, that's good.
The way Pat and Kenny read Oprah transcripts, like,
yes,
I pitched that idea as like stagehands read Oprah transcripts. And I think we did it once like that. It was just called that. But then Pat and Kenny are so iconic looking. They look like
Yes.
this sort of like Laurel and Hardy, like sort of like this comedic duo. And like, of course we have to call it Pat and Kenny read Oprah transcripts. So then it evolved to be that. And then we sort of built out the piece, and they bow with the piece. And there's sort of this structure to it. And then Oprah did her own real theme song. Oprah decided, I'm going to start singing and performing my theme song with a super cheesy music video of her singing and performing her theme song. And we said, well, we have to do that. And so then we take Pat and Kenny, and again, like that on Kalter pre-tape, we shoot for days. This location shoot, Pat and Kenny in a studio, like Oprah was in the studio in black and white, singing her song. Pat and Kenny up near an elevated train line, because that was in her piece, because she was in Chicago where there's lots of elevated trains. So she was out dancing and doing like skipping rope with people out under an elevated train. We're like, we're going to go do that. We went up to Harlem, found where there's an elevated train. Pat and Kenny are dressed in like pastel colored flowy clothes, jumping rope, and like performing the theme song. We went to a music studio, and like the late, Paul Shaffer and the band recorded that music, and they basically sang their own sort of Weird Al version of Oprah's theme song, where they sing the exact lyrics. The reason I'm talking about it that way is I loved anything where you could sort of pour that amount of labor into something that is so dumb, that is two guys coming out and pretending they're Oprah and a celebrity guest and building something that ornate and intricate and like elaborate. It becomes this sort of Rube Goldberg machine where like, now it's not just stagehands read Oprah transcripts, it's Pat and Kenny read Oprah transcripts with their own like hugely expensive opening theme song, like location shoot, editing, recording studio. And I love that. I love that. Anything where you get to obsess and build something, like the Alan Kalter Punch-Out pieces, where we were that started as one, we just needed a funny payoff letter, which is what we called the fourth letter in the mailbag, where you thought you could go out on a big laugh on something that was a little punchy. This is literally punchy. Alan gets insulted by a viewer who writes in. He says to Dave, hey, where was that person located? And they say it's, Mike Chisholm in Vancouver. Are you in Vancouver? Is that where you live?
Just outside Vancouver. Yeah, 3 hours away from Vancouver. Yeah.
They say it's Mike Chisholm outside of Vancouver. Yeah, and hey, Dave, where was that letter written from? Oh, it's Mike Chisholm in Vancouver. Alan says, great, thanks. He leaves the theater. And then there's this intentionally long pre-tape piece of Alan like walking out, getting a cab. He goes
making the trek.
Making the trek, and he finds Mike Chisholm and he punches him out. And it's exactly what you think is going to happen. There's no twist. The twist is there's no twist. And then he comes back, and now, a minute and a half of network airtime has been wasted watching Alan go punch out a guy that insulted him. And there's no twist to it. And we did Dave enjoyed this. Dave liked those pieces. You find that Dave, for whatever reason, he liked how dumb it is. He liked that there was no twist. But then over time, we did it over and over again. And there started being little twists, like Alan wound up punching out Regis Philbin.
Yeah.
Wound up punching out, I think at one point he punches out, I believe, himself in some incredibly sophisticated split screen technology. If I'm not mistaken, that happened once, unless I'm inventing that. But there was just like an elaborate series of these. And just like, where else but a 5 nights a week show could you just sort of find a way to drag out and belabor something like that? I loved doing that. I love that the old late night show would do that. And there were pieces that kind of could come back and evolve, and characters, Chris Elliott, the guy under the seats,
Oh yeah.
You'd be watching and you would hope that these recurring bits, there'd be a new installment of some recurring bit. And I think that instinct, if I'm thinking about it and projecting forward in my life, that instinct is what turned into us wanting to write a show like How I Met Your Mother, which was a very serialized sitcom, which we would plant an idea and we would beat it to death. We would, it was a sitcom with a memory week to week. It didn't have that sitcom amnesia. We wrote it like a soap opera where things got strung along, emotional arcs. And God, if we found a joke we liked on that show, we just found ways to twist it and bring it back. The Slap Bed and Slaps Giving, and Robin Sparkles has this song and that song. Speaking of the Canadian love.
Yeah.
And that idea of having the real estate across time on a TV show to find ways for these ideas to evolve, it just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in a movie.
No.
You know, it doesn't, in a lot of sitcoms, it didn't happen. But when you have, that was the great like playground of a late night show and late show and late night with David Letterman, because it was this thing where there was 5 shows a week and you could just try stuff because of that. And it was sort of this big canvas that you could paint on, and you couldn't do weird stuff every single night, but you could, there was enough real estate to sneak in these weird, subversive, bizarre ideas. And every now and again, those ideas kind of, one of them popped and it transcended, and it felt like it spoke to people. And then you could find ways to bring those back and play with them. And there was not, those were all of my favorite things, when we could like build those out and find character. Alan Kalter, I felt like we found Alan Kalter as a character. We would write so many, these elaborate, florid, crazy speeches for him. And bizarre pre-taped pieces. Like, he was a singing duo with his twin brother.
Oh, that was so good. Oh my God, that was
Alan
so good.
Kalter for the ladies. We would, any chance we could have Alan either give a huge long monologue live there on the stage, or could spin him out into a pre-tape piece. Anything we did with Pat and Kenny over time, sometimes Tony Mendez, finding ways.
I was going to ask about Tony Mendez, if you had any Tony Mendez memories.
And finding ways to kind of like find those characters. Tony Mendez was like this like hothead firecracker and would freak out and storm off, and like finding ways to sort of like define those characters. Alan's character.
Sue? Like when Sue would come on and berate Dave. Oh my God.
Yeah. And like, I think those are my favorite things. And when I connect it to the rest of my career, I'm like, I think it's because those were like hints of character development. I know it's funny to say that about these little late night bits, the late show bits, but there's a sense you were finding Alan's character, you're finding Pat and Kenny, what they were good at, what their comedic strengths were. And those are actually the same things you need to carry into a sitcom, as you find out what those actors' superpowers are and call them out, and have the sort of time and space to do that over years and seasons is a gift. And I think that's a real crossover between that launch of my career on Late Show and like How I Met Your Mother, for example.
Well, you've hit on a really cool a reason why this podcast is so much fun. Everybody who worked for these productions was a character. You know, there was something that was just a little bit askew, or for whatever reason, I think it attracts everybody. I had a really amazing moment that I cherish to this day, which would make her roll her eyes if she heard me say this. I met Barbara when I came out in October, because Rupert sponsors the show, and so we're the only sponsor of the Letterman podcast is Rupert G and the Hello Deli. And as he kind of closes up and gets ready to sell the place, you know, I happened to show up on a day where Walter and Barbara were shooting Rupert's favorite moments segment, and Walter said, "Yeah, come on down and see this." And I had a chance to talk to Barbara, and I thanked her in the way that I thank you, and she just kind of looked at me and she just said, "We're all kind of crazy. We're all just crazy, you know, like we're all like everybody who worked there." And I think that it attracts, you know, these two young guys who get the shot of their lifetime. These people who, like, I think of Brian Tetta comes in as an intern, just wants to intern. Like, I look at the Letterman podcast right now as that I'm kind of in the spirit of that. I'm interning. Like, I just want to be part of it, because I feel that same connection to the oddness. And I'm not saying I'm a character. I'm saying you all were characters, though. And I just, I appreciate the fact that you could find the real life, but also the humor, and the joy and the entertainment in these people. And again, you said it perfectly, more so than someone, you know, some of these A-listers that would be sitting there doing the thing that needs to be done to keep the money coming in for the show.
Yeah.
But you guys yourselves were characters. I talked to Steve Young once about refillables, and it seems to me that the refillables that showed up, as a writer, writing a refillable is one of the most difficult things you could ever set out to try and do. But you fall into these refillables when something tickles the fancy of Dave. You touch on something without even knowing it. There's a third rail there. You and Carter touched on so many of them. And I'm really, really grateful for your part of the Late Show and the Letterman legacy. You created iconic things. And
well, look,
you
man,
still stayed so humble. Like, you've still stayed so humble with this, Craig.
We're so grateful to you for, you know, like remembering that stuff and appreciating it at the time. Like I said, there wasn't as much of a sense of the connection to the fans night to night. We were lucky. We got a little bit of it. There were these forums, and there was a late show .com, like the website, and you would get messages. And the viewer mail. The funny thing is, we really did get huge stacks. We get stacks and stacks of letters, like the same time. We really did. If you walked into our office on any given like Tuesday afternoon, you would just see reams. And it did mostly switch to email, but sometimes we'd get some email through the Late Show website and stuff. We get some real letters too, and you would get some fan feedback that way, kind of at an earlier time than before social media and that stuff. So getting to knowing that there were fans like you out there really receiving this work and getting it spoke to you on a level where it stuck with you in some way.
Yeah,
that's the dream. That's the dream. Honestly, as a writer, that's the dream. I don't care if you're writing for Late Show with David Letterman or How I Met Your Mother or like whatever it is. Like whenever you hear that something that you obsessed over, some really strange, arcane thing, again, that you poured so much work into something incredibly weird and stupid and pointless, but it's artful in its pointlessness in some way. And the fact that could like reach somebody who's like a smart, cool person like you, and that it can mean that, and that you could articulate that back to us, is like, I mean, that's a gift to us too. So thank you for.
Okay, well, fantastic. Gosh, gratefulness all around, everybody. You talk about the stacks and stacks of letters. At that point, was there a writer's assistant who would bring in those letters to you guys? Like, was it Ellenberg or guys like that who would, or did you go through them yourselves? Like, they were curated a little bit before they hit your desk, right?
Yeah, they were. We would get huge printed out stacks. Very unenvironmentalist of us, really, in retrospect. But we would get huge stacks it wasn't Lee, one of my favorite writers on the show with us, and people.
What a great guy.
He's a great guy. He did start off as an assistant at the very beginning of when we were there, but then got promoted to be a writer.
Yeah.
But I don't remember who it would have been bringing us these stacks and stacks of letters. But yes, we did get served up by a PA or maybe the writer's assistants, writer's researcher. Somebody would bring us. I don't think we printed them out ourselves, but they really were stacks. They were giant stacks. And you just leaf through but it was, in retrospect, it was a way to get a little like fan feedback too, because sometimes you just get something like that before the internet, before like social media and stuff. The nascent days of the internet. So I guess we got a little extra feedback, more so than other writers, because we saw each and every one of these, messages to Dave that sometimes became mailbag letters. But yeah, it was like an early interface with the fans in a way to get those messages directly.
Do you still play music?
Yeah. Carter and I, we met playing music in college. Yep. We met in bands. Playing in bands is what led to us being a writing team. All through our days at Letterman, we were still like writing songs and playing in bands. Our band, the Solids, we'd play shows when we wrote for Letterman, and we would pass out our little band gig flyer. Hey, would you come to our gig Saturday at 7? Whatever. Probably not even Saturday. It might be Sunday. It's some shitty time slot that we got. Yeah. And a lot of the Letterman like crew and writers would come to our shows because they were supporting us. And so, yeah, I even remember like our last night working at Late Show with David Letterman, the night we finished and left, we played a Solids concert, and a lot of the writers and crew and stuff came out to the show and like sang us out. We gave us our final round of applause at our little band's performance. And it was great. So yeah, we kept the band going, and we wrote a lot of songs for How I Met Your Mother. We did the theme song for How I Met Your Mother, the Solids. That's Carter and I. Anytime you saw a really dumb comedic song on How I Met Your Mother, we usually wrote it. I will briefly plug that there are 2 albums worth of that. How I Met Your Music Volume 1 and Volume 2 that you can find on Spotify and Apple Music anywhere. That's all. The reason I bring that up, and other than shamelessly plugging something I did, is that we tried to write as much musical stuff as we could on Letterman too, and we got to create these fake musicals and this fake boy band called Fresh Step. Yep. And to that, we weren't really writing the music for that, even though we probably were. We would have loved to have done that because we were these frustrated songwriters. But to write lyrics, serve those lyrics up to Paul Shaffer, and then Paul Shaffer comes back to you with a hit song.
Yes.
With a straight up hit song, or a musical number that is unbelievable. Yep. To see that band of like some of the best musicians in the world turn your little lyrical bullshit into something amazing. That was such a gift of that show. So the music side of us was fed by that show because we got to do that. And we kept writing songs for How I Met Your Mother. We kept writing like real songs, or our attempt at real songs to be a rock band for our band, The Solids. And the Solids we have a bunch of music up. We have our own Spotify Solids channel if people want to check that out. And there's a lot of like our non-comedic, not intentionally comedic. Stuff there. And so music is.
So you're still playing?
We still like record some of our songs and put them out. We haven't played a concert in like years. We did a little Solids reunion concert a few years ago where we played a lot of the music of How I Met Your Mother as a charity benefit, and we raised some money.
That's fun. That's fun.
It's close to my heart. And we had intended to do it again because it was a huge success. It's like 3.5 years ago, but the pandemic hit and we didn't get to do it again. So I'm hoping we will do that at some point. We had like Josh Radnor from How I Met Your Mother came and did some songs with us. Kristen Milioti, who was the mother from How I Met Your Mother, she came out and did songs with us. And at that concert. So I'm hoping we can do something like that again someday. But the music has always been a huge part of my creative life, Carter's creative life. And it was a huge part of our creative life on Late Show and then How I Met Your Mother. So like, and now my main way to perform music is playing songs with my son. My son's on the drums, I'm on the guitar and vocals. And we play about 50 like 90s alt rock songs.
Awesome.
And, we're basically a full on like dad band. I've made him old beyond his year. He's like 16 and he's like, to him, it's all about Pixies and Radiohead and Pearl Jam. And like, to him, like music died about 2003 or something. So I've really indoctrinated him, unfairly brainwashed him into liking all the now dad rock that I like. But it's wonderful. I play music all the time with my son, and it's still a huge part of my life. And
you just made my day. When Will Lee, when he came on the show, the first thing we did was start talking about Radiohead. Like and my granddaughter, she's 5. I'm already doing the same thing with her when I take her in the vehicle, and I'm putting the same thing. It's like when we were growing up, and people didn't have the MC Hammer shirt on; they had like the Doors shirt on. They liked the stuff from or Pink Floyd or things like that.
It's crazy, but now it's that. And I think that's that is what Letterman's legacy is to so many people. Like sometimes I think of that old late night show, Late Night with David Letterman in the 80s, like akin to like the Velvet Underground.
Oh, good.
So like
good
one
pull.
of those bands that was like not the big hit band, Late Show, the one on CBS that had many more viewers than Late Night ever did. But that idea, like they always said about the Velvet Underground, only 1,000 people bought the Velvet Underground's album, but all of them started bands. Yes. You know what I mean? That's always the old line about the Velvet Underground. And that idea of like owning your influences and knowing that even if you weren't the biggest hit of all time, if you do work that is unique and true and has a vision and a voice, and you stay true to that, that can reach people, and maybe they will start a band. And that's how this whole thing keeps going.
Okay, so I'm gonna move to the close now, but we're gonna do a nice little leave here. If this thing ever becomes a thing, like this is a thing, but if it ever becomes a real thing, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to do a companion podcast to this. There'll be a second one. It's going to be called Live on Letterman, and it's going to just focus on the musical aspects of Letterman, both the music acts that either came on and broke or had legendary moments, that kind of a thing. Because again, you could do an entire podcast just on that, or the comedic writing. Like I think of Steve Young, I think of going all the way back to late night. You talk about Weird Al as an influence, music and the comedy music on Letterman. Again, a gigantic piece that doesn't get talked about enough. So Live on Letterman, we'll talk about that if we ever.
It's a great idea. It's a great idea. And there was so much music-based comedy on Late Night and Late Show because of Paul Shaffer. Yep. And then speaking of influences and the interconnectivity of everything, that goes back to Saturday Night Live and Paul Shaffer, doing musical comedic bits back then with like Bill Murray and like Martin Short, and like it is all, I know, and it's all interconnected. And I think the musical side of the comedy, because we did a lot of music-based comedy on that show. There was this great bit called Pedestrian Theme Songs, where we would write lyrics to footage of just people walking around your street. And you would see a guy walking down the street, and we would write lyrics and give it to Paul Shaffer. Not we, the writing staff in general. I think Chris Harris was in charge of that piece. Another brilliant writer you should have on.
I got to get him on. Like if we can get contact info, I got to get Chris on.
Fantastic Late Show writer who then wrote on every season of How I Met Your Mother for 9 years.
If we could hook that up.
I feel like he was in charge of that piece, Pedestrian Theme Songs. And that was a room written bit where you would watch clips of just B-roll footage shot of pedestrians walking around New York City, and you'd come up with a funny theme song lyric for it. Give the song to Paul without really knowing what it was going to be musically, and Paul would see the footage and read your little lyric you wrote and go, "That's going to be Bruce Springsteen." and he would create like a Bruce Springsteen sounding theme song for some guy that was like crossing the street at 56th Street on 2 days ago. And now this guy has his own Bruce Springsteen song written by Paul Shaffer. And the musical, I think don't short sell the music based comedy on that show, and we got to be part of a lot of that. You're right, that's a whole other conversation.
It is, and we'll start there the next time. Sure. The next time that we do this, it's funny as you say that. I get this little. Sometimes I'll have little regrets of times where it's like, okay, I know I could take a step out onto the bridge, but I don't do it. When we had Paul on, one of the things I got uncharacteristically nervous. Normally I'm not nervous doing these things. I'm excited. But the moment Paul entered the room, I was like, fuck. And I got nervous. And so I pulled back on a few of the things. Thankfully he said he'll come back on, and I think I'll be a lot more forthright with him. One of the things that I wanted to ask him is what it would take, how quickly he could write a jingle. And hey, the Letterman podcast needs a jingle. What would how fast could he do that? Because I've heard how legendary his turnaround time was in doing things like that. He could do things so quickly. And we will. Live on Letterman is going to, as far as I'm concerned, in my mind, it's going to happen. We just got to figure out a way to make it a thing.
Have him on. You tell him that when he comes on, he has to be at a piano or a keyboard.
Yes.
And you say to him, I'm going to give you these lyrics for a jingle. You write some lyrics. You write the lyrics are the jingle of the Letterman podcast. And you say live on the spot, you say, Paul, here's these lyrics. There's just like 2 lines. Get a melody, get a jingle. You will watch him write an incredible jingle in front of your eyes. That would be, I guarantee you, he would be like, yep. There'd be no, I feel like he would just do it and kill it, because there was never a moment where we gave Paul something that he didn't elevate. And we did a lot. We really got to write a lot of music-based stuff because we were in a band. We wrote songs. We were music dorks. So any opportunity we spotted to do that, we tried to be part of that. And musicals and fake music acts and, a fake boy band that did multiple appearances on the show. We would, the gift of handing these stupid lyrics you wrote to Paul Shaffer, and then he comes back with what could be like a radio-friendly hit song, Talk to the Hand by Fresh Step. You got to be fresh to fresh with the Fresh Step. One's like the rave up, one's the ballad. They're both hits. I was trying to pressure like Walter and the Letterman YouTube folks. You got to get those like up on Spotify. You got to get those songs. Those 2 songs are hit songs, and you have to like go dive into the sort of video clips. Those are hit songs. I would like listen to those as songs to this day. I think you see if you can get Paul to do that. That would be amazing. If he can write you a jingle, I bet he would do it. He's the nicest guy, and I bet he would just dust off the old chops and have it in 1 second.
I think you're right. And I'm going to do it. That's the goal. I'm glad we went down this musical part, because it's such a big part. Some of the stuff stuff Steve Young did, and just that turkey, that industrial, the Thanksgiving song is just
hilarious. Steve with the acoustic guitar. Yeah, hilarious. Yeah, Steve is a great songwriter, singer, music guy too. He did so much funny music-based stuff on there, and record collection that Steve was in charge of. There's the connection between late night and late show to music in general, whether it's the comedic side or whether it's just honoring and platforming and giving an opportunity and voice to amazing new bands and alternative stranger music that was not getting on at 11:30.
Yep.
That old late night show was the number of music acts it helped break and help expose people like you and I to as teenagers. That was really something special. And they were bands and acts and types of music you weren't going to see on other, more mainstream shows. And I think, I think there's a huge amount to be said there. So I think you should do it. Like I say, the moment it becomes a thing, and if that were the case where we could then have access to some of this footage and start, because I think you almost need the performance at that point. And at that point, there's rights and clearances and things like that have to come into play. So it's a little bit more intensive, but yes, I think it's a wonderful, wonderful time capsule. And if we don't, I'm a big fan of the transfer of knowledge. And if we don't transfer this knowledge, it gets lost. I said this to Robert Morton the other day after he came on. I said, my granddaughter is 5 years old, and goddamn, if she doesn't know what you guys did before I leave this earth, I won't have done my job. I don't know why I feel compelled to do that, but I do. And this transfer is so important. I'm going to finish off. I knew the last question I was going to ask you, Craig. And so this is it.
I knew it before even Kalter came on. You are part of the legacy of Letterman, where you came in young, you got to build a career based on the fact that you started with Letterman. That puts you in a legacy part of the greatest body of broadcasting work in history, that of Dave and Company. You're in a unique part. You went from Letterman, you created this massive hit show, got a chance to really stretch out and become an artist that got a chance to do these things, dreams come true moments and things like that. Now, you know what, you and I are both similar age. I'm a 76 baby. You're in your late 40s as well. You're at this place where you can kind of create, you can kind of stretch your feet out. And I'm really curious as to what you're doing now, and maybe some of the dream projects or aspirations that are in your head now that you can create and you're in this place that you can do that. Congratulations on all of your success, by the way. It's amazing to see. Congratulations on staying so grounded and so you through that success. What are you working on now? What are some of the aspirations of things you'd like to create?
Well, it's funny. I mean, you know, first of all, one of my I have so many thoughts at once there, but one of them is like, be nice to everyone and stay in touch with everybody, because so many of these opportunities and overlaps, they come back around in your life. You know what I mean? Like, one of the things I'm doing is I do like rewrites of movies sometimes, and I punch up movies. It's because most of that I do is related to the fact that these guys, Chris Miller and Phil Lord, were writers on How I Met Your Mother in season 1, and then they go on to direct the Lego movies, and they go on to direct the Spider-Man movies. And to this day, they'll bring me on to do like punch-ups and jokes and work on scripts that they're working on and stuff, because they're my buddies, because we had fun making stuff up in one setting. And then in another later, where I was their boss, they worked for me on, and Kalter on How I Met Your Mother season 1. And now they bring me in and I get to like add jokes and make their already amazing stuff like a little bit better every now and again.
Yeah.
That's sort of like a little pop in, pop out, you know, like keep up the writing, the joke writing chops. But I you know, I'm writing a lot more prose these days. I just published my first short story in the Iowa Review that just came out a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
I published a personal essay in the Boston Globe last fall. They're both on the theme of being the parent of a child with a disability, which I am, and they're really meaningful and personal to me. And I'll plug my website, which is craigthomaswriter.com. You can find those pieces there. Yep. And I've written Shouts and Murmurs for the New Yorker, and I've written for McSweeney's. So I like just like writing. I'm simplifying things in a lot of ways, because I got to do all these big crazy things with these big Rube Goldberg machines, and like needing the actors and the locations and needing to pitch it and needing money and millions of dollars to make stuff. And I still am doing some of that. The dream project is Kalter and I wrote this musical movie that we've been trying to make for years, that it brings together so much of what we've done in our lives, where it's very personal. It has music, it has comedy, it's actually very dramatic. It also is set within that world of being the parent of a child with a disability. And it's just something, it means the world to me. And Kalter and I wrote all the songs, wrote the script, and we've been trying for years to get that greenlit and made. And we came very close, and sort of went away in the classic indie movie style, where we were almost about to shoot it, and then it fell apart due to unfortunate logistics and some celebrity stuff that happened. And it's a much longer story than I can say here, but the point I'm trying to make is, I think we just always look for, you know, for me, I'm looking for ways to keep expressing things in new ways that I haven't already done before, and that is one of them. And I'm trying to write a lot more words on the page, because there's something satisfying about, that's the final product. This is a short story, this is an essay, this is a thing. I don't need 100 other spinning plates to make this be the final thing. And so I also am trying to write more prose, and I'm sort of working on a book idea, and I've been writing more stuff like that, while still doing some feature rewrites with my friends. And like, basically I try to do things that are either deeply meaningful to me and personal, whether or not they would get to be made or not, or that are just fun and keep the joke writing kind of like chops up a little bit. So I sort of like volley back and forth between those two things. And mostly I'm a dad to my 2 kids. I have a 16-year-old son that I play music with. My daughter's 7 and hilarious and awesome and wonderful. And I'd say that being their dad is the number one thing. And then everything else is kind of after that.
I love it. I love it so much, and love that you have been afforded the opportunity to experience all of these things. from the big to the small. If I take a lesson out of that, because I mean, you're a guy that's seen it all. You understand what it is to be to see something from the beginning, middle, end of an entire project and be successful at it. And then you go back to what's important in life, being a dad, and the process, because the process of writing these things creates a satisfaction unto itself. That is something I can 100% identify with. The process of doing this show brings so much joy that I don't give a shit about the outcome, because the outcome is the process. And hearing you,
absolutely,
being able to write and find the joy in that, that's incredible. And I'm so grateful. That's wisdom, by the way. You're in your late 40s. That's wisdom that you're giving to people right now, talking about being present in the process. That's a very, very important part of life, I think.
I think I'm only just learning it right now. I'm only really just learning it right now. Is like the search for meaning and the joy of the process of doing it. Those are more important than the outcome. The outcome's wonderful when it happens, and we got so lucky to have a lot of wonderful outcomes. But chasing the outcome can diminish the search for meaning and the joy of just doing. And so sometimes simplifying things down to just words on a page, or like, you know, I'm not going to try to make necessarily another big years-long TV show. Like, maybe that's not, you think you're supposed to keep chasing after all these things, and this idea of bigger result, outcome, external validation. And then after, what you realize over time, and it takes a while, is like the times you were most joyful in your life are when you were really loving what you were doing, you were loving the people you're doing it with, or you were finding deep meaning and connection. And you can find deep meaning in making really dumb, stupid, funny stuff too. Like, if you pour your entire existence and focus and creativity into like shooting Pat and Kenny singing an Oprah theme song, that is a form of like divinity and you know, elation and nirvana in its own self. And you realize that getting lost in what you're working on and the joy of creating something that's the reward. That's the reward ultimately. So
and find a bar where everybody knows your name.
Yeah. And if you can't find one, make one.
Oh my God. We'll say our goodbye privately, so I'll stop recording here. But I just, on behalf of the strong but feisty fan base that we've already created here at the Letterman Podcast, I cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your insane schedule to come out here and spend time with me. I can't wait to do it again. Getting you and another writer or something like that on. I'd love to do that. I'd love to get you and Carter on at the same time, if you guys can still stand on being in the same Zoom call with each other. I would love to have. I would love to have you guys on at the same time down the line as well. But the most important though, Craig, I can't tell you personally, from a personal standpoint, how grateful I am for you being part of this legacy of this thing that I hold so dear. And I'm just representing a lot of other people who say the same thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Oh my God.
Pleasure to be on. I would come back again. And it's thank you for keeping alive this body of work, and the idea that you want to like find a way to keep it alive for the next generation. You think about wanting to communicate what it meant to you, to your granddaughter, to other younger people. That is, that's why writers write, and that's why we make the stuff we make. And so we, thank you to you for doing that and for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Okay, how much fun was that? That was a really fun conversation, and it was fun because Craig had fun with it too. And I just love the fact that some of these people that have gone on to these monster careers in many respects after Letterman love to just go back and talk about their time at Letterman. And it's so great. It's funny, talking about the different eras that Dave and company went through, and you talk to some of the old timers who were there at the very beginning of late night, and then you talk about people who were there near the end, and they kind of started their careers with late show, and the things that they learned and the things that they then went on to do. I find that very fascinating as well. And how many folks who worked for that show have gone on to some really cool, unique, sometimes very big things like How I Met Your Mother. That was a fantastic episode. So grateful. Once again, the Letterman Podcast brought to you by Rupert G and the Hello Deli. Go to hello-deli.com if you want to get any Late Show with David Letterman merchandise, official Late Show with David Letterman merchandise, also Rupert G merchandise. Get it soon. It's going to be a collector's item. The place is up for sale. He's had some bites on it. and there is stuff that is progressing. So we don't know what the future is going to hold for these things. One thing we do know is that Rupert will not be a deli owner in the not so distant future. And we can, we're not being cryptic saying that. I'm saying go to hello-deli.com to get your Late Show with David Letterman merchandise, your Rupert G merchandise. Show is so fantastic. I love it very, very much. Thank you to everybody who has reached out. Please continue to. Please like, share, subscribe, all of that crap. I will keep asking until we don't have to ask anymore. When will that be? We will know. We'll know exactly when that will be. But we just appreciate everybody else out there who appreciates the greatest body of broadcasting work in history, that of David Letterman and Company. This has been the Letterman Podcast with Mike Chisholm. Coincidentally, I am Mike Chisholm. Thank you and good night.
Overcoat and underpants.